The royal kitchen at Anmer Hall buzzed with unusual energy on a crisp October morning in 2019. Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge, stood at the marble countertop, her sleeves rolled up and an apron tied around her waist. Across from her, Prince William adjusted his own apron with mock seriousness, eyeing the ingredients spread between them like a general surveying a battlefield. Right then, William said, cracking his knuckles dramatically, "Ready to lose gracefully, darling?" Kate laughed, but her eyes held a competitive glint that anyone who knew her well would recognize. "We'll see about that, William. Remember who won the pancake contest last year?" The friendly rivalry had started innocently enough during the early days of their marriage. Both had grown up in households where cooking was valued, though for different reasons. William's culinary education came from necessity during his military training and university days, where survival often meant mastering the art of making something edible from whatever was available. Kate, on the other hand, had learned from her mother Carol, who believed that knowing your way around a kitchen was essential life knowledge, royal title or not. Their first real cooking competition had happened quite by accident in 2012, just a year after their wedding. They were staying at Balmoral with the Queen, and a power outage had left the castle's main kitchen temporarily out of commission. The royal chef had been flustered, worried about preparing dinner for the family, when both William and Kate volunteered to help using the smaller, backup kitchen that ran on a different power grid. "I can handle this," William had said confidently, having successfully fed his RAF search and rescue colleagues many times during late-night shifts. "Actually, I've got this," Kate had replied with equal certainty, remembering the elaborate dinner parties her mother had taught her to orchestrate. What followed was an impromptu cook-off that had the Queen herself serving as judge. William attempted his signature dish, a hearty shepherd's pie that had earned praise from his squadron mates. Kate countered with an elegant coq au vin that showcased techniques she'd learned from a French cooking course she'd taken during her gap year. The Queen, with her characteristic diplomatic grace, had declared a tie, but not before noting that William's pie could feed an army, while Kate's coq au vin showed remarkable finesse. The royal seal of approval on both dishes had only fueled their competitive spirits. Now, 7 years later, their kitchen competitions had become legendary among palace staff. The rules were simple, but strictly enforced. They had to use the same core ingredients, work within the same time limit, and couldn't ask for help from the professional kitchen staff. Most importantly, they had to prepare something that their children would actually eat, which often proved to be the most challenging requirement of all. Today's challenge had been proposed by Charlotte, their 4-year-old daughter, who had announced at breakfast that she wanted something special but not too fancy for lunch. George, their 6-year-old, had added that it needed to be better than what Granny makes, referring to his beloved great-grandmother's simple but treasured recipes. Little Louis, though only 1 year old, had contributed to the discussion by enthusiastically banging his spoon against his high chair, which they interpreted as wholehearted approval of whatever was to come. The chosen battleground for today's competition was comfort food with a twist. They each had access to chicken, potatoes, seasonal vegetables from their Sandringham gardens, and a selection of herbs and spices. The time limit was 2 hours, and the judges would be not only their children but also Maria, their longtime housekeeper, who had become something of a cooking mentor to Kate and was known for her brutally honest opinions. William started by examining the chicken with the methodical approach he'd learned in the military. "Fresh, good weight, should work perfectly for what I have in mind," he muttered to himself, already mentally planning his strategy. Kate, meanwhile, was studying the vegetables with the eye of someone who had learned to appreciate quality ingredients. She picked up a butternut squash, testing its firmness, then moved to the potatoes, selecting the ones that would work best for her planned preparation. "No peeking," William said, noticing Kate glancing toward his workspace. "I wouldn't dream of it," she replied innocently, though she had already noticed him reaching for the rosemary and was adjusting her own herb selection accordingly. The competition officially began when Maria entered the kitchen and announced, "Your time starts now, Your Royal Highnesses. May the best cook win." William immediately began breaking down his chicken with practiced efficiency. His plan was ambitious, a modern take on chicken and dumplings that would combine the heartiness his children loved with flavors sophisticated enough to impress the adults. He'd learned the base technique during a particularly memorable evening at Clarence House when his father had challenged him to recreate a dish from their favorite pub. Kate took a different approach, starting with her vegetables. She planned to create a chicken and root vegetable tart with a homemade pastry crust, something that would be visually impressive but still approachable enough for young palates. The recipe was an adaptation of something she'd learned from her mother, but with techniques refined through years of practice and experimentation. As they worked, their competitive banter continued. "Is that store-bought pastry?" William teased, knowing full well that Kate always made everything from scratch when time permitted. "Is that instant dumpling mix?" Kate shot back, equally aware that William prided himself on making everything the traditional way. Both were, of course, making everything by hand, but the teasing was part of their ritual. Over the years, their kitchen competitions had become as much about the playful interaction as the actual cooking. It was one of the few times when the pressures of royal life faded into the background, and they could simply be a married couple trying to outdo each other in the most domestic way possible. The kitchen filled with the aromas of their respective dishes as the first hour progressed. William's chicken was simmering in a rich broth infused with herbs from their garden, while he prepared his dumpling mixture with careful attention to texture. He'd learned through trial and error that the key to perfect dumplings was in the consistency of the dough and the timing of when they went into the pot. Kate's pastry was chilling in the refrigerator while she prepared her filling, combining the chicken with roasted vegetables in a sauce that balanced cream with white wine and fresh herbs. Her technique showed the influence of professional cooking classes she'd taken secretly during the early years of their marriage, wanting to surprise William with her improved skills. "Something smells incredible over there," Maria commented as she passed through the kitchen to check on their progress. Which something both William and Kate asked simultaneously, then looked at each other and laughed. Both, actually, Maria admitted. This is going to be a difficult judging. As the second hour began, both competitors moved into the final assembly phase of their dishes. William carefully dropped his dumplings into the simmering chicken mixture, adjusting the heat to ensure they would cook through perfectly without becoming tough. The timing was critical, and he found himself checking his watch frequently while making small adjustments to the seasoning. Kate rolled out her pastry with practiced motions, then carefully lined her tart pan and filled it with her chicken and vegetable mixture. The final step was creating a decorative pastry top that would not only look beautiful, but also allow steam to escape properly during baking. With 30 minutes remaining, both dishes went into the oven, and the waiting game began. This was always the most nerve-wracking part of their competitions, the period when all they could do was hope that their timing calculations had been correct and their flavors would come together as planned. 10 minutes, Maria announced, and both William and Kate began preparing their presentations. They had learned from previous competitions that visual appeal mattered almost as much as taste, especially when trying to entice their children to try new variations of familiar foods. The kitchen timer's chime announced the end of the competition, and both dishes emerged from the oven looking golden and aromatic. William's chicken and dumplings had a rustic, homey appearance that promised comfort and satisfaction. Kate's tart looked elegantly professional, with its perfectly browned pastry and artfully arranged surface. As they set their dishes on the cooling racks, both William and Kate surveyed each other's work with the respect of worthy competitors. After years of these friendly battles, they had developed an appreciation for each other's strengths and techniques, even as they remained determined to win. The real test, however, was yet to come. In just a few minutes, their harshest critics would arrive to render their verdict. The dining room at Anmer Hall had been transformed into a makeshift judging arena. George and Charlotte sat at the table with the seriousness of professional food critics, while little Louis was secured in his high chair, ready to render his verdict through enthusiastic gestures and facial expressions. Maria had prepared scorecards, though everyone knew that the children's reactions would be the real determining factor. Before we begin the tasting, Kate announced formally, both chefs would like to present their dishes. William stepped forward first, carrying his chicken and dumplings with obvious pride. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my signature comfort classic, herb-infused chicken and dumplings with garden vegetables, prepared using traditional methods passed down through generations of hungry soldiers and university students. Charlotte giggled at her father's dramatic presentation, while George inspected the dish with 6-year-old skepticism. "It looks like the soup Granny Diana used to make," he said, referencing stories they'd heard about William's mother's cooking attempts. "That's exactly the inspiration," William replied, his voice softening slightly at the mention of his mother. "She always said the best meals were the ones that made you feel loved." Kate followed with her own presentation, setting down her golden tart with a flourish. "I present a modern interpretation of Sunday roast, free-range chicken and seasonal root vegetable tart with fresh herb pastry, designed to combine familiar flavors in an elegant new form." "It's very pretty, Mummy," Charlotte said diplomatically, though her expression suggested she was reserving judgment until after tasting. Louis banged his spoon against his tray in what they chose to interpret as approval, causing everyone to laugh and momentarily breaking the tension of the competition. Maria served equal portions of both dishes to each judge, ensuring that presentation wouldn't unfairly influence their decisions. The tasting began in relative silence, with only the sounds of chewing and occasional mm sounds from the children. George, always the most analytical of their children, took his role as eldest judge seriously. He tried William's dish first, chewing thoughtfully before moving to Kate's tart. His face remained neutral, giving nothing away. Charlotte, more expressive by nature, couldn't hide her reactions. Her eyes widened when she tried William's dumplings, and she immediately reached for a second bite. When she tasted Kate's tart, she nodded approvingly, but returned to the dumplings for a third helping. Louis, fed small spoonfuls by Maria, showed clear preferences through his reactions. He opened his mouth eagerly for more of William's dish, but turned his head slightly when offered more of the tart, though he didn't reject it entirely. "The judging panel needs time to deliberate," Maria announced after everyone had finished their initial tasting. She led the children to the adjoining playroom, where they could discuss their verdicts without the competitors hearing. Left alone in the dining room, William and Kate looked at each other across the table. The competitive atmosphere had given way to something warmer, more reflective. "Your pastry was incredible," William said genuinely. "Really professional quality. Where did you learn that crimping technique?" Kate smiled, pleased by the compliment. "Remember that cooking course I took in France during my gap year? The one my parents thought was a waste of time? I've been secretly practicing ever since." "Your dumplings were perfect, though. Light, fluffy, properly seasoned. You've definitely improved since the early days." "The early days," William laughed, remembering some of their less successful attempts. "Remember the great pasta disaster of 2013? "Which one?" "There were several," Kate replied, grinning. "Though I think my worst moment was when I tried to impress your grandmother with that elaborate dessert that collapsed during dinner." "She was very gracious about it," William said diplomatically. "She ordered ice cream from the kitchen," Kate corrected. "But yes, she was gracious." Their conversation was interrupted by the return of the judging panel. George led the group with Maria carrying Louis, while Charlotte skipped behind them, clearly excited to deliver their verdict. "We have reached our decision," George announced with formal gravity that made both parents struggle not to laugh. "But first," Charlotte added, "we want to say that both dishes were really good. Better than the time Daddy tried to make pizza, and it looked like a pancake." "Thank you for that helpful context, sweetheart," William said wryly. Maria stepped forward with the official results. The judges were unanimous in their appreciation for both dishes. However, they did identify some clear preferences. The tension in the room was genuine, despite the light-hearted nature of the competition. Both William and Kate had put real effort into their dishes, and both wanted to win. "Charlotte would like to explain the decision," Maria continued. Charlotte straightened up importantly. Daddy's food made us feel warm and happy inside, like when we're sick and want something cozy. Mummy's food was very grown-up and pretty, but Daddy's tasted like home. George nodded in agreement. The dumplings were really soft, and the chicken fell apart perfectly. And it had that smell that makes you hungry, even when you're not hungry. Lewis contributed his verdict by reaching toward William's empty serving dish and making grabbing motions. So the winner is... Maria paused dramatically. Prince William, by unanimous decision of the junior judges. William raised his arms in victory, while Kate applauded graciously. "Congratulations," she said, leaning over to kiss his cheek. "Though I demand a rematch." "Rematch granted," William replied magnanimously. "But I choose the next challenge." As they cleaned up together, the real satisfaction came not from winning or losing, but from the laughter that had filled their home and the memories they were creating. Maria, watching them work side by side, smiled at how these cooking competitions had become such an important part of their family life. "What made you decide on chicken and dumplings?" Kate asked as they loaded the dishwasher. "Honestly, I was thinking about Sunday dinners when I was little, before everything became so formal and scheduled. There was something about that dish that felt like it belonged in a real family kitchen, not a palace," William answered thoughtfully. Kate understood immediately. Despite their privileged circumstances, both of them worked hard to give their children experiences that felt normal and grounded. These cooking competitions were part of that effort, a way to create traditions that were uniquely theirs. "Your turn to choose the next challenge," Kate reminded him. "I'm thinking baking competition. Something sweet." Kate's eyes lit up with competitive fire. "You're on. But I should warn you, I've been practicing my pastry techniques." "I noticed," William laughed. "That tart was seriously impressive. I might be in trouble." As evening approached, the family gathered in the sitting room, the children playing contentedly while William and Kate reflected on their afternoon. These moments of normalcy were precious, carved out of schedules that were usually packed with royal duties and public appearances. "You know what the best part was?" Kate said quietly, watching Charlotte show Lewis a picture book. "What's that?" "For 2 hours, we were just a mom and Dad trying to feed our children something delicious. Nothing else mattered." William nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. In a world where their every public appearance was scrutinized and analyzed, their private cooking competitions represented pure, unguarded family time. "Same time next month?" he asked. "Absolutely. But next time, I'm winning," Kate replied with determination. The competitive spark between them was already reigniting, but underneath it was something deeper. The appreciation for a partner who understood that sometimes the most meaningful victories happened in the kitchen, with flour on their hands and their children's laughter echoing around them. Little did they know that their next cooking competition would present challenges they hadn't anticipated, testing not just their culinary skills, but their ability to adapt when nothing went according to plan. 3 weeks later, William stood in the kitchen at Kensington Palace, staring at what could only be described as a baking catastrophe. Flour covered every available surface, including himself, and smoke was still dissipating from the oven where his first attempt at chocolate souffle had met its dramatic demise. "Need some help?" Kate's voice carried barely concealed amusement as she entered the kitchen, taking in the scene of destruction. "This is just preparation," William replied with as much dignity as he could muster while brushing flour from his hair. "I'm testing the equipment." Kate raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, instead surveying her own workspace. Today's competition was supposed to be about elegant desserts, William's chosen revenge for his victory in the Comfort Food Challenge. He had confidently selected chocolate souffle as his signature dish, remembering successful attempts during his university days. Kate had chosen to make a lemon tart with fresh berry compote, playing to her strengths with pastry work. What neither of them had anticipated was the oven malfunction that had turned William's careful temperature calculations into guesswork, or the fact that Lewis had come down with a mild cold that made him especially fussy and demanding of attention. "Perhaps we should postpone," Kate suggested diplomatically, watching William attempt to salvage his second souffle attempt. "Absolutely not," William replied firmly. A true chef adapts to circumstances. Besides, George and Charlotte have been looking forward to this all week. This was true. Their children had become invested in these competitions, treating them like family events worth celebrating. Charlotte had even drawn pictures of what she imagined their desserts would look like, while George had appointed himself as official timekeeper. The challenge was further complicated by the fact that they were cooking in the smaller Kensington Palace kitchen instead of their usual setup at Hall. The equipment was different, the space was more cramped, and they were working around the schedule of other palace staff who needed kitchen access for official functions. Right? Kate said, rolling up her sleeves with renewed determination. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. What do you need me to help you figure out? This was typical Kate, William thought. Even in competition, she was willing to help when things went wrong. It was one of the qualities that had first attracted him to her, this instinct to support rather than take advantage when someone was struggling. The oven temperature is completely inconsistent, William explained, showing her his notes. It's running at least 20 degrees cooler than the display shows, but it seems to vary depending on which rack you use. Kate nodded, immediately understanding the problem. We'll need to adjust all our timing calculations, and probably use the lower rack for everything since heat rises. They spent the next 15 minutes conducting temperature tests with an oven thermometer borrowed from the main palace kitchen, mapping out the hot and cool spots like military strategists planning an invasion. George and Charlotte arrived during this process, fascinated by the scientific approach their parents were taking. Are you doing chemistry? Charlotte asked, watching them chart temperature variations across different oven positions. Something like that, sweetheart, Kate replied. We're learning how our tools work so we can make better decisions. George, ever practical, pointed out the obvious solution. Why don't you just use the other kitchen, the one where they make the fancy dinners? Because that wouldn't be fair to the other people who need to work, William explained. And because sometimes you have to make the best of the situation you're in. It was a lesson in adaptability disguised as a cooking competition, though neither parent consciously planned it that way. These unscripted moments often turn out to be the most valuable teaching opportunities. With their oven mapping complete, they restarted the competition properly. William abandoned his souffle plans in favor of individual chocolate lava cakes, which would be more forgiving of temperature variations. Kate adjusted her lemon tart recipe to account for the longer baking time needed at the lower temperature. The kitchen became a symphony of organized chaos. William worked with the focused intensity he'd learned in the military, breaking down each step of his recipe into manageable tasks and executing them with precision. His chocolate selection alone involved 3 different types of cocoa, chosen for their specific flavor profiles and melting properties. Kate approached her tart with the methodical care of someone who understood that baking was as much science as art. Her pastry technique had indeed improved dramatically since their early competitions, and she worked the dough with confident, practiced movements that spoke of hours of secret practice. Daddy's making a mess again, Charlotte observed, giggling at the chocolate fingerprints William was leaving on various surfaces. That's because he's working with passion, Kate defended him, though she was secretly pleased that her own workspace remained relatively tidy. Louis, despite his runny nose, was stationed in his high chair where he could observe the proceedings. His cold seemed to have sharpened rather than dulled his critical faculties, and he watched each of his parents with the intensity of a professional food critic. The first real test came when William's lava cakes went into the oven. The timing was crucial, the difference between molten chocolate perfection and either undercooked goop or overcooked disappointment. With the oven's temperature quirks, he had to rely on visual cues and experience rather than following his recipe exactly. Kate's tart shell, meanwhile, was blind baking beautifully, the pastry turning golden without overbrowning. She prepared her lemon curd filling, whisking eggs and citrus with the careful attention required to avoid curdling. 5 minutes on the lava cakes. George announced from his position as official timekeeper. William peered through the oven window, trying to judge doneness without opening the door and risking temperature loss. They look almost ready. Kate, how's your timing? Tart shell will be ready in about 10 minutes. Then, another 20 for the filled tart to set properly, she replied, checking her own progress. The synchronized timing required for both desserts to finish simultaneously added another layer of complexity to their competition. In previous challenges, they had simply worked until done, but today they were aiming for a specific presentation time when both desserts would be at their peak. At the crucial moment, William pulled his lava cakes from the oven. They looked perfect the top set, but still slightly jiggly in the center, indicating that molten chocolate waited inside. He set them aside to rest while Kate put her filled tart in for its final baking phase. "Something smells incredible," Maria commented, entering the kitchen to check on their progress. "Much better than the smoke from earlier." "We had some technical difficulties," William admitted, "but we adapted." "The best cooks always do," Maria replied approvingly. "Your time management seems much better today as well." This was true. Previous competitions had sometimes resulted in one competitor finishing much earlier than the other, leading to desserts that were past their prime by judging time. Today, despite the oven problems and other complications, they were on track to present both desserts at optimal quality. Kate's tart emerged from the oven with a beautifully set filling and a perfectly golden crust. She immediately began preparing her berry compote, combining fresh strawberries and blueberries with a touch of honey and lemon zest. The colors were vibrant, the aroma fresh and bright. William dusted his lava cakes with powdered sugar and prepared individual plates with small dollops of vanilla ice cream. The presentation was simple but elegant, focusing attention on the cakes themselves rather than elaborate decoration. "Judges, please take your positions," Kate announced formally. George and Charlotte approached the judging table with their now familiar air of serious responsibility. Louis was wheeled over in his high chair, his stuffy nose making him even more expressive than usual as he anticipated the tasting to come. The moment of truth arrived as both desserts were presented simultaneously. William's lava cakes, still warm from the oven, promised rich chocolate indulgence. Kate's lemon tart, bright and fresh-looking, offered a completely different but equally appealing experience. But just as the judging was about to begin, a new complication arose that neither competitor had anticipated. The palace fire alarm chose that exact moment to activate, filling the kitchen with its piercing wail. Within seconds, security personnel appeared to escort the family to safety while the building was checked for any actual emergency. "Is it real?" Charlotte asked, covering her ears against the noise. "Just a precaution, sweetheart," Kate replied, gathering their coats while William quickly turned off all the kitchen appliances. They stood in the palace courtyard for 20 minutes while the fire brigade conducted their mandatory inspection. William held Louis, who seemed to find the flashing emergency lights more interesting than alarming, while Charlotte and George peppered their parents with questions about fire safety protocols. "What about our desserts?" George asked practically. "They'll be fine," William assured him, though privately he worried about how the temperature change would affect his lava cakes. Kate was more concerned about her tart, which needed to be served at just the right temperature for optimal flavor and texture. Too cold, and the lemon curd would lose its smooth, creamy quality. When they were finally cleared to return inside, both parents rushed to assess the damage. William's lava cakes had cooled more than ideal, but were still warm enough to potentially work. Kate's tart had actually benefited from the gradual cooling, reaching what appeared to be the perfect serving temperature. "Well," Maria observed diplomatically, "this certainly adds an element of unpredictability to the judging." The children, who had been remarkably patient during the evacuation, were now even more excited about the competition. The unexpected drama had elevated their dessert tasting from family fun to adventure. "Can we start now?" Charlotte asked eagerly. "I want to see if the fire alarm made them taste different." The judging began with George, who approached each dessert with scientific curiosity. He cut into William's lava cake with careful precision, and both parents held their breath as they waited to see if the molten center had survived the cooling period. A small stream of chocolate flowed from the cake onto the plate. William exhaled in relief, while Kate applauded the successful execution despite the challenging circumstances. "It's still gooey inside," George announced with delight. "And it tastes really rich, but not too sweet." Charlotte tried Kate's lemon tart next, her face lighting up as the tangy curd hit her palate. "Mummy, this tastes like sunshine. But the good kind, not the kind that hurts your eyes." The berry compote added bursts of fresh flavor that complemented the rich lemon perfectly. Even Louis, despite his congested state, showed clear enthusiasm when offered tiny spoonfuls of both desserts. Maria, serving as head judge, tasted both offerings with the careful attention of someone whose opinion carried real weight in these competitions. Her expressions revealed nothing, maintaining the suspense that had become an integral part of their family tradition. "This is a very difficult decision," she announced finally. "Both desserts show considerable skill and creativity. Prince William's lava cakes demonstrate excellent technique and perfect timing despite challenging circumstances. The Duchess's lemon tart shows remarkable pastry skills and beautiful flavor balance. The competitive tension between William and Kate was real, but it was tempered by genuine admiration for each other's abilities. Years of these challenges had taught them to appreciate the effort and skill that went into each dish, regardless of who won. However, Maria continued, the judges have made their decision based on which dessert they would most want to eat again tomorrow. Charlotte bounced in her chair with excitement, while George maintained his serious expression. Louis banged his spoon, clearly ready for the announcement. The winner, by the narrowest possible margin, is... Maria paused for dramatic effect. The Duchess of Cambridge, for her exceptional lemon tart with berry compote. Kate's face showed surprise and delight in equal measure. "Really? What made the difference?" "Charlotte said it best," Maria explained. "It tasted like sunshine, and George appreciated that it wasn't too heavy after dinner. Plus, Louis kept reaching for more, even with his stuffy nose." William graciously congratulated his wife, genuinely pleased by her victory. "That pastry was absolutely perfect. You've really mastered the technique." "Thank you," Kate replied, then added with a grin, "though your lava cakes were seriously impressive, especially considering everything that went wrong." As they cleaned up together, the children helping by clearing plates and wiping down surfaces, the afternoon's events took on a different significance. The competition had been fun, but the way they'd all handled the unexpected challenges together felt more important than who won or lost. "You know what I realized today?" William said as they loaded the dishwasher. "What's that?" "These competitions aren't really about the food anymore. They're about creating these moments where we're all completely focused on something together. No phones, no schedules, just us figuring things out as a family." Kate nodded, understanding exactly what he meant, and teaching the children that when things go wrong, you adapt and keep going. That problems are just puzzles to solve. Looking back on their years of cooking competitions, both could see how these challenges had evolved. What started as playful rivalry had become something richer, a way to model problem solving, good sportsmanship, and collaborative thinking for their children. "What's the next competition?" Charlotte asked, having overheard their conversation. "Well," Kate said thoughtfully, "what if next time we work together instead of against each other? We could take on a really challenging recipe that needs two people to execute properly." William's face lit up with interest. "Like a proper French dinner with multiple courses and precise timing?" "Exactly. We could be a team instead of competitors." George and Charlotte exchanged glances. "Can we still be judges?" George asked. "Absolutely," both parents replied together. As evening settled over Kensington Palace, the family gathered in their private sitting room. The dishes were done, the kitchen was clean, and the children were contentedly tired from the day's excitement. Today was better than the pancake contest, Charlotte declared sleepily from her position, curled up next to Kate. "Even with the fire alarm?" William asked. "Especially with the fire alarm," George replied seriously. "It made it more interesting." Louis had fallen asleep in William's arms, his breathing clear again as his cold symptoms began to fade. The sight of their youngest child peaceful and content felt like the perfect end to a day that had tested everyone's flexibility. "Same time next month?" Kate asked quietly. "Definitely. But let's check the fire alarm schedule first," William replied with a chuckle. As they prepared for bedtime routines, Both parents reflected on how these simple family traditions had become some of their most treasured memories. In years to come, their children would remember not just the delicious food or who won which competition, but the laughter, the teamwork, and the way their parents showed them that the best parts of life often happen in the kitchen, with the people you love most, making something wonderful together. The competitive cooking tradition would continue, evolving as their family grew and changed, but always serving its deeper purpose, creating space for pure, unguarded family joy in lives that were often anything but simple.